Good morning, everyone. I see everyone is starting to come in from the wait room. Thank you very much for joining us today for our community project funding webinar. I'll give it another second while we let some other folks hop on, and then we will get started. Just some general housekeeping things as folks are logging in. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button. As we are going through our presentation, please feel free to drop your questions in this box. When we get to the Q&A portion, we will go ahead and go through those questions and call on you and make sure that we get them answered. All right, folks, I think we are at critical mass. Thank you again for joining us. This is Congressman David Trone's community project funding webinar. Again, housekeeping things. Q&A pod is at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in there and we will get them answered during our Q&A portion after the presentation. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Krista O'Neill, our legislative director. Krista, floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Again, my name is Krista O'Neill. I am Congressman Trone's legislative director. For those who I haven't had the chance to meet, I look forward to doing so and really want to say thank you at the top for your time this morning as we do a quick run through of community project funding, but really appreciate all the work that you and your organizations are putting into this. So thank you so much from the whole team. With me today, I have Shonda Jefferson, Matt Pastor, and Taylor Donahue. So we will each become very familiar to you as you are going through the community project funding process. We have our emails at the very end and can share any of the information we talk about during this presentation. So, feel free to take notes, but anything we need to follow up on, please just let us know and we'll give you our contact information at the end. So real quick, the sort of lay of the land here, I'm going to go over just the timeline, just to set the stage for kind of how all of this works at the very high level. Matt will dive into a little more details on the application process. Shonda, who will be meeting with a lot of your organizations, we'll talk about her kind of lessons learned or how she's been conducting these meetings. And Taylor is also on as well. He's been our expert on community project funding, but congratulations to Taylor. He will soon be going out on parental leave. So we have systems in place to cover for Taylor when he's out. But thank you for bringing your expertise to this call, and we will support you as you go out on parental leave very soon. So with that, I will share my screen here. Hopefully I can make that work. All right, just gonna check with my team here real quick. Matt, if you can give me a nod that looks right?
You can go into full screen mode if you'd like.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right, well, again, thank you all for joining us. And we'll give a quick overview of the federal budget process. So this is my clean version. This is what's supposed to happen. We start our fiscal year in the government on October 1st. Throughout the fall, the agencies and departments are developing their budgets, coming up with the funding needs that they have, the new programs that they want to start or improve the programs that currently exist. Those proposals are submitted to the Office of Management and Budget. We get kind of our first preview of what's going to be in the budget when the president delivers his State of the Union address, as President Biden did a few weeks ago, and especially note that he hit on the unity agenda, which is extremely important for our office. The budget is formally due from the president to Congress on the first Monday in February, which would be February 7th this year. After we get the budget, that's sort of the starting point for our official appropriations process. So though we've had our form live on our website for since early February, it's easiest for us to compare it to what's in the budget request. So once we get that budget, we can say, okay, we want to add these programs or take these programs away or add funding or keep it level with the president's request. So that's really our basis that we compare our budget to in Congress. So after we get the budget, we will go through these different requests and put our requests into the Appropriations Committee. As I'm sure you all know, Congressman Trone sits on the Appropriations Committee. So once Appropriations receives those requests, then we start writing the bill. We go through the markup process. The committee passes, the subcommittees pass the bills. then it goes to full committee, then to the House floor. Then it does their process, passes their appropriations bills. We go into a conference, and by the beginning of the next fiscal year, we are supposed to pass all 12 appropriations bills to fund the government. But reality looks very different. So the only real thing that stays constant is the start of the fiscal year is always October 1st. The agencies do develop their budget plans. The State of the Union can come earlier or later, especially if it's a new president, it might come a little bit later. The budget is due on the first Monday of February, as I said. Any president, Republican, Democrat, it always comes late, especially if they're a new president or new administration, but into a second term or a second year, President Biden submitted his budget yesterday. So a couple weeks, not the most egregious we've ever seen, but definitely a couple weeks late. And in part that was because, which we'll go over in a second, the omnibus appropriations bill from fiscal year 22 was completed on March 15th and not by October 1st, but we can go into that. So now that we have the budget, another thing Congress looks at is what's called the budget resolution. And I only mention this because if you want to get fancy with your technical terms, the budget resolution is not really what funds the government. It's more of our blueprint for what we would do with federal funding. And the reason it comes up in the news a lot is it often includes reconciliation instructions. So that's how you can get something through the Senate instead of the 60 vote threshold through just a simple majority. So that was how Democrats passed the Affordable Care Act. That's how Republicans passed the Tax Cuts to Jobs Act. And that's what we were attempting to do Build Back Better under. And we still have the power to do Build Back Better or something similar because of these reconciliation instructions that were passed in the budget last year. So again, not super important for community project funding, but hopefully, interesting for anyone tracking the federal budget. So then now that we have the budget, again, we go through our authorizations and appropriations processes. We have heard from the committee that our appropriations requests will be due between April 27th and 29th. So we backed that up to create our own external deadlines to get your community project funding applications in by April 8th. And if I'm wrong, Taylor will correct me, but I'm pretty sure it's April 8th, great. And that gives us enough time to go over each and every request, give them, follow up with anyone if we need more information, meet with a congressman, go over our priorities, all of that, check into the committee, make sure that we have their information, that all the information the committee thinks we need before we officially submit it on April 27th. Our programmatic and bill language requests or report language requests are due April 13th. Also a form on both of these forms are on our website. So this would be more if you're supporting, if your organization benefits from grant programs that already exist in the, in the federal budget. If you want to support level funding or increase funding from what the president suggests, or create a new program, or support language that would direct an agency or department to do something. Those are our more federal level non-community project requests. We are also happy to work with you on those. So all of that is due coming up in the next 5 weeks or so. And after that, and this is again where the process gets a little messy. So the House side will continue to work through, put in our request to the committee, write the bills, go through markups. I expect that the House will probably pass their bills by July. And probably see them on the House floor. And around that time, we will know, through the markup and the voting process, we will know what community project funding requests of the congressmen are made it into the House version of the bill. Then we will have the Senate, and the Senate is always a question mark for any of us even who have been doing this for a while. So last year in fiscal year 22, the Senate didn't even do their markup or bill process until after the start of the fiscal year. So that's kind of what they're doing on their side. So even the challenge for us is even if we see your community project funding come through on the House side, we still have to wait for the Senate to do their work. And then we have to conference those bills together and see what comes out in the end. So again, last year, the House passed their bills by July, the Senate didn't. The beginning of the fiscal year happened and Congress had to pass what's called a continuing resolution to keep the government funding at the prior year's funding levels, so fiscal year 21 funding levels. And that happened all the way through mid-March. By the time we got to mid-March, we finally reached an agreement. Congress conferenced those two, the Senate and the House versions of each bill, and we passed the omnibus on March 15th. So March 15th was the time we finally could say our first 10 community project funding projects were made into law. So that was a huge, huge date for us a few weeks ago. Very exciting. That hadn't happened in 11 years. So very, very great a moment, but it didn't happen October 1st like we would hope. It happened March 15th. So always appreciate everyone's patience, as Congress may not exactly hit the deadlines you might expect them to. I'm thinking we will need, and experience would dictate that we will need, Congress will pass another continuing resolution because we have midterm elections coming up. That will mean that people kind of want to see how the elections shake out to give either party a mandate if one party wins more than the other, and then they will negotiate government funding from there. The last thing I'll say about the appropriations process is it very, very, very rarely happens that we would rely on a continuing resolution for the full year. Appropriations is the one thing we manage to do, Congress does every single year. So it's a really good track record of success for getting your priorities in, whether it's community project funding or it's your more programmatic or language requests. So really excited to kick this process off. Again, budget dropped yesterday, so we really feel like this is the starting gun for appropriations process for fiscal year 23. And really excited to start receiving your applications and diving into your projects. So with that, I will kick it over to Matt.
All right, hello everybody. For those of you who have not submitted projects before or were not on this webinar last year, welcome. For those of you who were part of this process last year, welcome back. It's going to look a little bit different than it did last year, so bear with us here. I'm pretty much going to go over what we're looking for in a successful application. The first of which is really to consult our community project funding resource guide. The guide, I think, is about almost 80 pages, thanks to Taylor, who put together a pretty exhaustive list. You should sort of consult this guide before starting your application, as you're going through the application, and even after you submitted, you can check back against the guide. The guide is meant to be very thorough. It is not entirely exhaustive, and there will be opportunities for you to ask questions. But we would say, kind of use that as your Bible, as your source material, because it really does go through all the eligible accounts, all the supplemental questions we'll need. It pretty much walks you through from start to finish of every account that is eligible. For those not aware, 10 of the 12 appropriation subcommittees include community project funding. The only ones that don't are the State and Foreign Operations and the Legislative Branch. And within those eligible subcommittees, the 10, there are only selected accounts. This year, we have a couple more in a few subcommittees, and I think we lost one or two in a couple other places. So if you were looking to request from an account that you submitted last year, double check with the guide, make sure that account is still eligible. In each of the account lists, you'll find, thanks to some work we did from last year, all of the money that was included from FY22 for those community project funding accounts. So you'll see if you go to the one that you're looking at, if it was included last year, you'll have a total amount of funding, you'll have a median award, you'll have an average award, and that will kind of give you a sense of the range. What I would say is if your project is outside of that normal range, don't worry about it. As long as you can demonstrate that there is a bona fide need for that project, there's a good level of community support, and you have a spend plan that supports that project, so you can feasibly spend all that money within the year of the funds being obligated, that's not a problem. So don't hesitate to maybe go outside of that range. I would say if the range is 1 to 3 million and you're thinking 20 million, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but I think there is a little bit of wiggle room there. And as always, feel free to consult with us. We're happy to give you some feedback, and we can always check with the committee. The second point here is answer all the questions associated with the account. If you've ever applied for a federal grant before, you'll know that the agencies will give you a laundry list of questions that they need answers to. These are intended to make sure that your project is viable, and that you have all of the required matching funds. If that is something, you've done all the environmental impact statements, if that is a requirement of the account. It's pretty much to make sure that if we're going to give you this money through the account in question, that you have all you meet all the criteria. I saw Sunny's comment there to define what an account is. Basically, all of the subcommittees, there's 12 of them, get an amount of money that funds all of the agencies of the federal government. Within agencies, there are individual programs, you're probably familiar with these, that give out monies for certain certain types of projects. So you'll see, within the Department of Agriculture, there's a specific account just dedicated to broadband, right? You have the Reconnect program, or within HUD, you have the Economic Development Initiative program. These programs are dedicated to specific functions. And so if you're applying for something under that account, it would have to match, the intended statutory purpose of that program. So back to what I was saying, make sure you answer all those questions. The committee is going to ask us those questions. So if we are selecting your project and we're submitting it, we need to have answers to all those questions, because if we don't have an answer, the committee is going to come back to us and say, we're missing X, Y, and Z, and to them that's incomplete. So we want to have as much information as you can give us. More info is always better. Don't feel like you have to write it into 5 or 6 words. You can send us a paragraph. And it is a process. We can go back and forth. We can consult with you to make sure that we've got all the information. But Taylor did go through and make sure to include all of those supplemental questions in the guide. So if you see it there, be sure to give us an answer, and I'll show an example of that in just a few minutes, and we can kind of go over what that looks like. The third point here is including an itemized budget of all expenditures. This is more for us. When we're evaluating these projects, we want to make sure that there are no red flags. The red flags specifically can be operating costs or ongoing costs. This includes salaries. So there are certain expenditures that are not allowed to be included within community project funding. And if they are included in your project, you'll either have to remove them and revise your project, or we just unfortunately will not be able to fund them. So keep that in mind. And the spend plan, the itemized budget is also really important because it kind of gives us a sense of where the breakdown is, what the spend plan is, and if the committee has any issues, say if the bulk of your funding is within, you're trying to spend it within a year, and maybe this will be, you're spending it on construction that will take 2-3 years. It can't necessarily stretch longer than the year within it's supposed to be obligated. There are a few exceptions, but I would say a general rule is if you can't spend the money within a year, that'll be an issue. Fourth point here is a big one. It is community project funding. It's called that for a reason. We really want to demonstrate community support. There's no minimum, I would say. There's no minimum to the amount of community support that you can bring. 10 to 15 is a good benchmark. I think we would like to say meet that minimum criteria, but if you have 200 examples of it, definitely send those as well. The examples of community support, I'm just going to read you a list here. They can be letters of support from local elected officials. They can be press articles, letters to the editor, editorials from local publications. They can be resolutions from town councils or boards, letters from individual stakeholders. If it's listed on a state intended use plan, a community development plan, or other planning document, those count as community support as well, and definitely pass that along. Really what the committee is looking for here is to see the community in question has a real need for this project, and it's supported by not just our office, but folks out in the district. This is sort of, I think, the example that comes to mind is the Bridge to Nowhere. They're trying to make sure that the community really needs the projects that are being submitted, and that it's not just to satisfy one or two people who maybe have a close relationship or something like that. We don't want anything like that. We want to make sure that we're really serving the district. And I think if you look at the projects we were able to get included this year, you'll see that there was a really compelling need for them. So the more support you can give us is great. I think last year we actually had one that had so much support we had to break it into 2 PDFs because it wouldn't fit into the website. So that is the kind of thing that we like to see. And the final thing I will say is please call us or email us if you have any questions. There's going to be a question and answer portion here at the end, and I see some questions coming in. We'll try to address more of the general questions, but if you have sort of specific questions that are project specific, feel free to call us, feel free to email us. I think Krista said our contact information will be at the end. And then in a minute, I will turn it over to Taylor and Shonda, who have been taking a lot of individual meetings with you all to talk about projects, to talk about questions that you have. And I'm going to hand it over to them in a minute, but I think Krista, if you just want to go to the next slide. So this is an example of just a section from the guide if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. I just picked out EDI, Economic Development Initiatives here. So when you go through the guide, if this is the account that you're hoping to use, you'll find a lot of helpful info here, which, like I said, Taylor has put into the guide for us. It's very helpful. You'll see total funding. The average project cost that was funded last year was 1.3 million. The median project cost was 1 million, and you see the highest and lowest there. So you have a sense of the range, and I think this can help you kind of decide how much you're looking for in your project request. But as I said at the earlier section, if you have a compelling need for $7 million, you can tell us that you can spend it, and there's a lot of support for it. Don't hesitate to request that. And then Chris,
Hey, Matt.
Yep.
Matt, we got a special guest. Can you see my screen, or do I need to stop sharing? All right, moving over.
Hey, everybody. This is Congressman Trone. Hope you're having a great day. Matt, are you doing a wonderful job?
Doing my best.
I didn't doubt it for a second. You got a good team here. We got the A team on, but I just want to say thank you for everybody. This tutorial is a good way to help us understand the potential of how community projects can really make a difference. And the ones we did last year, home runs. But it all starts with you folks documenting what needs to get done and then putting a package together of community support. But you got to do the work. That if you do the work on the community support, me, Krista, Matt, the whole team, we're going to do the work in appropriations, and where all this comes from to really help drive all of our projects so we can get over the finish line in the 6th district, because we want our more than fair share. That's the key. And so anyway, we're going to be going to bat for you hard. Get us the ammunition, and I hope this tutorial, this visit today is helpful. And as you go along, you have questions, reach out and call. Call the folks on the call Sonny, etc., and we'll help you. We'll work as a team, because we are one team together. One team, Team Maryland, how we get community projects that don't need to go to Texas. They don't need to go to Nevada. They need to go right here. So thanks again, guys. Matt, continue.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. I will just let Krista jump back into the slides for me to go over my final slide before I will kick it over to Taylor and Shonda.
Bear with me, but keep going, Matt, and I'll try to get the slide back up. Thanks.
Everyone enjoys the special cameo, just a little bit of star power for our webinar here. Want to just go, I think it's back a slide or two.
That one or one forward?
This is perfect. So like I was saying here, we've got a range of highest requests, lowest requests. Like I had just mentioned, if you're outside of this range, you'll notice, look, the median request was, $1 million, 1.3. You can see the highest request is 5. What I will say is, in certain circumstances, you can request 5. The committee might say we'll fund it at 3, but don't shy away from high requests just because they might be outside of the normal range. There's a lot of times ways for us to get you funding that might not get you all the way where you're going, but it might get you 75% of the way there. And to us, I think that's a positive. And Chris, if you want to go to the next one. Finally, this is just an example of the supplemental questions. This is clipped from the EDI. There's more than this, but just for example, if you're going to request something through the EDI account, make sure that you're looking through all these questions and you have answers to all these questions in your application. Because as I said, when we submit it to the committee, we need answers to all of these questions. And if we don't have them, we have to kind of go back and forth between the committee, between you, and we're sort of rushing to get it in by the deadline. So the more information that you can give us at the outset to make sure your application is complete, that you're answering every question fully, that'll make our lives easier. So with that, I'm going to give it to Taylor and Shonda. They can talk to you about some lessons they've learned, and we'll give you a little bit more background on the entire process.
Hi, everyone. We're so happy that you all are here to learn about the Community Project Fund process. As Matt mentioned, Taylor and I have been taking meetings with groups about community project funds, and we're happy to take specific meetings with you if you would like. Just send us an email, and our email is located in the guide. I also want to take a minute to share some tips and tricks that our team has learned over the last year. before going into the questions that will come next. And Matt, I think you covered this. A lot of the groups come in and ask, should we sway away from spending millions of dollars, or should we just hit that low mark? We just think that it's important for you to request what you can reasonably spend for your project. Some subcommittees provide guidance on funding caps, which are included in a guide, but our team learned that you shouldn't be discouraged from requesting above average if you can reasonably budget that. So if your project, as Matt mentioned, is $2 million, ask for $2 million and justify it in your budget. Another thing that Taylor and I are telling groups is Senator Cardin and Senator Van Hollen are also engaged in this process. So our team highly encourages you to reach out to their teams as well to submit requests in their office. In the Senate, the community project funding is called congressionally directed spending. So reach out to their offices and ask their teams about the process for congressionally directed spending. And I know this year their due dates are very close to ours. I know one Senate office is April 6th, but the other two, ours along with one of the other senators, is April 8th. So make sure that you reach out to them and also submit your project to their offices as well. This is another thing that we also like to mention. Community project fund accounts are in essence the same as competitive federal grants of the same name. And our team found that if you apply for the federal agency competitive grant of the same name, both the committee and the agency look favorably on that. So for instance, if you're interested in the Department of Education, Innovation and Improvement funding, apply for that funding and also apply for the community project fund that is of the same name for that one. And if you have questions about that, we can definitely clarify, but it's good to apply for both. And I have to reiterate this, the idea that the community support documents that you're sending in or submitting, make sure that they are diverse. Don't solely rely on your elected officials, but ask for people to submit letters of support that are actually benefiting from your services or benefiting from your community project. So if you have a project that's helping the community thrive, reach out to people like parents, if it's a nonprofit organization, or if you have news clippings. So make sure that you include all of those. And the last thing is the guide is purposefully extensive. So many accounts have specific needs and questions that will need to be answered before submission. And you saw those on the previous slide. So please take the time to go through those FAQs and information associated with the account that you are applying for. Taylor, would you like to add anything or clarify anything that I mentioned?
No, I think you covered it. Senator Van Hollen's deadline is April 6th and Senator Cardin April 8th. I don't know if those are 5 p.m. or midnight, but you would have to check with their teams. The only other thing I would add is when we say account, we're referencing the grant of the same name, essentially. All of these are essentially just appropriated grants from the federal government rather than in the competitive grant funding that normally comes from the federal agency. So that's all that means. But otherwise, I think you covered pretty much everything that I would say. So I will go back on mute now.
I have a good teacher.
Wonderful. Thank you, Taylor, Shonda, and Matt. I think we have some questions in the chat, so I'll get to that. Let me start sharing. I'll start with one question. I think maybe we'll start with Matt. But Taylor and Shonda, feel free to jump in. So one exciting thing, I don't know if we buried the lead a little bit, but last year we had 10 community projects, and this year we got 15, which is great. Something we're very excited about. So Matt, one question for you, or Taylor, Shonda, feel free to jump in. When we look at the guide, our project seems to fit in a couple different programs. Do you have any advice on how to pick the best program to submit this request under?
Joe, do you want to jump in on that one, or you go for it first?
I got it. I would say that's probably a question best addressed by meeting with our team and describing what the project's purpose is. A lot of accounts look similar, but they have a little bit of different need areas. And so by talking with our team about the specific project, it helps us kind of determine where the best fit would be.
Thanks,
I
Taylor.
think that's right. And I was going to just chime in quickly to say, if it turns out after the fact and we submit it, and this has happened to us before, if we submit it to the committee and they'll tell us, hey, it might be better suited for this account rather than the one that you submitted it in, there is a chance for you to change that. So don't think that once you've chosen your account, you're locked in and you're wedded to that account. There is opportunity for you to change it if, at the 11th hour, the committee decides it might fit better into a different fund.
Thank you, guys. Our next question, can additional community support documents be submitted after the deadline?
Yeah, so we're taking that on a case-by-case basis. Our deadline is officially April 8th, but if you need additional time to get more community support or different community support, please just let our team know when you apply. That way we can work directly with you about when we need the community support. Right now, we're saying April 15th is probably if we're going to push it for community support, but we can work with you on a case-by-case basis.
And if we have a hard deadline from the committee to upload our documents and then they shut it off. That being said, we are a member of the committee and have a good relationship with their staff. And then the committee goes through, I believe, a 15-day review process. So they will also reach out to us and say, this request is missing some documents, or this request would benefit from XYZ. So we will continue to communicate that back to the folks we're working with. Our next question, would stipends be considered salary in the funding request? Matt, do you know that offhand, or is that something we should follow up on?
So I think in this specific case, it would depend. My inclination is that stipends sort of lend themselves to operational costs and would probably be ineligible. But again, I think this would be something that you might want to meet with Chanda and Taylor to talk a little bit about the purpose of the stipend and exactly what it would achieve. And then we can always run it by the committee. I don't know if that is different than what you were going to say, Taylor.
Sorry, my video keeps jumping out on me. Yeah, that would be a case where I would want to run it by the committee because I don't know the answer specifically. And depending on who asked the question, I can tell you if I've talked to that person about their project or not already.
Thank you. And these are great questions, by the way. Thank you for everyone who's chiming in. Can community reports and studies be used as proof of need?
Absolutely. If you have a document, anything that shows that this would benefit the community, if it shows really any document that you have, whether it be from a private group, if it's funded by the town, if it's funded by another nonprofit that shows the need, really anything that can prove that there is a compelling need for this project. I wouldn't say that you're limited to what I listed. Feel free to think outside the box. If you've got things that might not resemble exactly what I said, feel free to submit those anyway. We're not going to reject them. The committee likes to see, like I said, a really, really broad show of support. So as I said at the very outset, if you got something that shows there's a need for it, please send it our way.
Yeah, I would expand and just say, the committee obviously wants to see support for the project itself. But if you have documents or articles or anything that you can submit that supports you as an organization or the idea of the project, it doesn't have to be specific to the project, send that too. The more the merrier. It can be broad, it can be narrow. They just want to see that there is support for both you as an organization and the need for the project.
Chanda, this one's for you. Just to clarify, are you suggesting we apply for CPF, congressional directed spending, and the same competitive accounts or the same competitive grant? So apply to us, apply to your senator, and apply through the regular federal grant process, correct?
Yes, that is exactly what we are suggesting, to apply for the senator's process, to apply for this community project funding, and also any account that's available by a federal agency. So apply for all of them, but make sure that you pay attention to the deadlines, because sometimes the federal agency grants aren't open right now. So you can go to their websites and look to see, what the deadline is for that particular grant, but we recommend applying to all of them.
And just so everyone's aware, we certainly work with our Senate counterparts very closely throughout this entire process. We flag what projects we're moving forward with. They do the same for us. So it's a very collaborative process. And the senators are not, since they have, the full state to look after, we are able to focus on our district a little bit more specifically, but they have bigger accounts because they have the whole state to look after. So in many cases, it makes more sense for us to take the lead because we know, the congressman knows the district a little bit better. And in other cases, it makes sense for the senators to take the lead because they have bigger accounts. So that's helpful. Can we submit support we received from last year and this year? Matt, yes?
I was going to say, I don't have an issue with that, although I would say don't rely just on the support you had from last year. If you have support from last year, that's great. But I would say if you wanted to sort of include some updated material as well. Taylor, I don't know if you had a thought.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it's for a project that did get funded last year, then no. Because there would be looking for a difference in project at that point, and you shouldn't rely on community project funding as revolving funding. This is meant to be a one-year cash injection, essentially. So if you're applying for the same project and it wasn't funded last year, that's fine. I would try to add new support if possible, but there's no problem with that. But if you're submitting community support for a project that was funded last year, then I would say no.
Is the application the same for Congress and the Senate? We did look at our Senate counterparts' applications. They're very similar. They're not, word for word the exact same, but there's tons of overlap. Taylor, would you add anything? If you've collected enough information for us, it should translate very well to the Senate application.
Yeah, they're similar enough to where I would say they're the same. They're on a different platform, but the Senate just uses a different platform. So,
are the areas of interest the same for congressional and Senate office, or are they specific to each? I think again that goes back to Congressman Trone obviously knows this is 6th district like the back of his hand, and then the Senate has the whole of all of Maryland to look after. Anything you would add to that, Taylor or Matt? Next question. If we have a collaborative project which covers several counties in Maryland with a model of collective impact, should we go to the senators?
For this, I would say feel free to request it of us. I would say definitely request it of the senators. You can send it to us and say if it spans the districts of 2 members of Congress, submit it to both members. When you do that, though, just let us know. It's possible if we end up submitting one of those projects on your behalf and it covers several counties in Maryland, we can work with the member from the other county to sort of support that request as well. So we can do it in the House side, we can do it with multiple members to build support. But I think as Shonda said, regardless of what your project is, feel free to submit it to both senators and to us kind of just to maximize your chances. We have 15, as we mentioned, the Senate doesn't have a cap. So you want to really make sure you're taking advantage of that opportunity.
And I would say, feel free to, if it's crossing multiple districts and maybe you have more of your project in a different congressman's district, still flag it for us, because often we can just let the committee staff know that, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, this is a project we support. Even if it wasn't one of our specific 15 requests, it still goes to the member support. Are matching funds from local or state required to be in place before application submission? Can the organization commit their own funds from donations for the matching fund?
So do you want to take that one?
yeah, I was going to say, correct
Yep.
me if I'm wrong. I believe the answer is they don't need to be in place. There just needs to be a plan for matching funding. And it's dependent upon the account on where that matching funding can come from, but it can generally be from multiple sources.
Great, and we are happy to dig into that a little bit further if you want to send us an email to follow up. How can we verify if a project is on the notice of funding opportunity for a particular program?
That was a great.
We
I,
finally stumped you, Taylor?
yeah, I don't know the answer to that one, to be honest. I would imagine if it's a state or local program, you would have to check with your state or local entity that mirrors the federal program.
I jumped quickly to the funding match question because I saw there was a couple follow-ups. This is directly from the committee, just to give you an idea. Matching funds do not have to be in hand prior to requesting a project, but you have to have a plan to meet such requirements in order for the project to be viable. So as Taylor said, as long as you have a plan in place, as long as you have a funding stream that you know is coming, that's fine. It doesn't need to be in hand when you request it. It just has to be able to, be delivered by the time that the funding would come from the committee. So I hope that answers your questions. As Taylor said, if there's a question of where the funds come from, if you can self-fund, that does vary depending on the account. But feel free, like I said, to submit it anyway, and we can always clarify that after the fact.
Thank you. If you are already funded for a federal project, would continuation application be counted? Follow up on that one?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer that.
I don't know off the top of my head. I think there is a question of, because there's already funding in place, sometimes we've had issues with not necessarily jurisdiction, but if the funds are going to come from an agency and the funds come from the committee and they're a little bit duplicative. So I think we'd have to answer that one more specifically for you. But we're happy to sort of chat after this to find the answer.
Also, I think for Matt, if a project takes longer than a year to complete, can the grant be extended, like construction? I believe the money has to be spent in that fiscal year, correct?
I was going to say there are certain exceptions. The rule of thumb is generally for it to be spent within the fiscal year. Obviously, when we end up passing these bills, it moves the timeline somewhat. So there is some flexibility. I think you just have to have a viable spend plan that shows how you're going to use the funds. If it was going to be over the course of like a decade, I would say no. But I think it's more for approximate spending in terms of the next 12 months rather than a longer term period. I don't know, Taylor, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, because these accounts are basically the same as the grants of the same name, it does sort of depend on which account you're going to. Some of them have like a 5-year obligation period, some have a 2-year. It really just depends on the account. I would say a majority of the accounts, though, you have to spend within the year that you're given the money, and that's the day that the money is sent out, not from the day that we sign a bill.
Which brings up a good point. We haven't done this process in 11 years. So with the bill signed into law March 15th, departments and agencies are still working out how to get that money into the hands of our community partners. So that is now the responsibility of the administration. We are obviously helping with that process, but even with the bill passed 14 days ago, there's still not physical checks in hand. They are still working through that process. So it is lengthy. If we want to request funding or support language, such as directing an agency to direct some funding to a specific project, such as construction of new traffic control tower, fire truck, is there some special documentation we would need to submit? So we would have to kind of help you work through if that is going to be more of a general request. So we couldn't, at the federal sort of programmatic or language request, you would fund a whole grant program. And then if you would get something out of that at the local level, you then apply for that grant. So we could help you determine if you're looking more programmatic or at a community project funding. So that would kind of be the first step to answering this question. But to the second, if you decide it is a programmatic request or a language request, that is also a form on our website. It's the second one down. And feel free to email me about that, and I can help set you up with myself or our legislative team to talk about the specific subcommittee bill that it would fall under. So just let me know what your request is, and I'm happy to help with the programmatic side. The great thing about programmatic or language requests is that we don't have a limit. So, I believe, I think we have a very high limit, like 75 net or anyway, 100, something like that, when we run out of the database. But there is not as much of a cap on that. So we are happy to take those requests. Does the guide define what is meant by spent, encumbered, invoiced, or paid?
The guide doesn't. I think the best way to think about it is once the money is in hand, it needs to be fully used in the period of availability of the. They want to make sure that the money is basically spent in the fiscal year, quote unquote, because our federal fiscal year is volatile. But they want to make sure that it's spent within that fiscal year and not something that's revolving, if that makes sense. Matt, do you have anything to add or change?
No, I mean, the general way to think about this is the funding we pass is, quote, to fund the government for a year. So at the end of that year, all funds must be spent, or else you run into some issues with appropriations law that aren't worth getting into. So that's sort of why we require the spend plan up front. I think there is a little bit of flexibility, and agencies could give you guidance if you end up actually getting the award. But a rule of thumb would be to make sure that you can spend those funds within the amount of time that you're given. As Taylor said, a couple of accounts have longer timeframes, but generally make sure that you can spend all the funds within 12 months or so.
Yeah, I wouldn't request money for anything outside of a year's worth of spending, generally. So if you think you can spend $1 million in a year, but you can't spend $2 million, don't request $2 million.
And to that point, that kind of goes to the viability angle. Not to say that of any nonprofit or organization, but if you're a small nonprofit, say you have a staff of 5 and you are trying to get $10 million, the committee might say, is this organization able to absorb $10 million and get it out the door within a calendar year? And that sort of raises the question of if the project is viable. And in certain circumstances like that, they might cut the amount that they're giving you just because they believe you're not going to be able to take the money that you've been given and actually get it out the door within the time frame.
Thank you. Oh, this is a technical question, so I'm sure I won't be able to answer it. When working on the online application of the grant, will our information be saved as we go in the event we would need to come back later in the day to finish the application, or do we need to complete it all in one go? Taylor, have you done a run through on our website?
Yeah, so our application is a Google form. So in general, no, it can't be saved. That is to say, if you leave it up on your computer and come back to it later, it may be there, it may not, depending on whether your computer falls asleep and deletes data. I would say try to get it all done in one go, just to be safe. If you find you're having problems with applying or the application, please just let us know, and we will find a different way to get you to apply. We ran into that problem last year where the website just didn't work for somebody, so we had to have them basically send us a printout of the application. Just let us know if you're having trouble with it, but generally, no, I would do it in one sitting.
I think having been in the seat of many of these organizations and submitting my own requests prior to this job, just what I would do is look at the form and copy all the questions into a Word doc, fill it out at my leisure. You can copy the questions into a Word doc without hitting submit at the end, and then we will never see it. And if you accidentally do submit something before you finished filling it out, just let us know and we'll delete that line and wait for you to fill out the whole thing. And then also, if you're filling out a Google form, some companies or organizations block Google from their workplace. So I would often just do it on my home, like fill it out at work and then do it when I got home, my home laptop. Some little tricks. Next question, should we submit multiple projects? I think we would like a sense of what your top priority is, but feel free.
I was going to say exactly that. If you're going to submit, if you have 4 compelling needs and they're all, real things, you got a lot of support for all of them, feel free to definitely submit them. To Chris's point, I think if you're going to submit multiple, let us know which one is your priority. But feel free. That there's no limit on the number of problems that exist in the district. Obviously, we can only choose 15 of them. But I wouldn't say that you should feel limited to only submitting one if you have a lot of things that can be funded.
And this is where working with our senator counterparts can be beneficial. I'll just leave that there.
Gonna say the same thing. You know, putting in that work to get all that information together, even if we can't select all 4 in this example. You know, we could work with you to identify different grant opportunities, flag it for our Senate offices. So that work will not go to waste. What is the fiscal year for the application? So we are working to put this in the fiscal year. We are currently in fiscal year 22, and we are working to put this in the fiscal year 23 bill, which again would in theory be due by October 1st, but will not, at least in my estimation, get passed until after the election.
And just a note that Taylor mentioned before, obviously, as Krista mentioned in the beginning, there are continuing resolutions. There are things that push the funding back. Your year for spending it will not be rigidly October 1st to October of 2022 to September of 2023. It's when the funds enter your account. And that's highly dependent upon when we actually sign the full year bill. So we signed the full year bill 2 weeks ago. It's probably going to take agencies anywhere between 2 to 3 months to absorb that funding themselves and then get it out the door. So our recipients from last year probably won't get funding until maybe May or June. But the moment that money comes into their account, that starts the clock. So 12 months from that day will be when you have to obligate. Because obviously they're not, if they don't get it until June, it's not expected that they spend it in 4 months.
Great, and that was actually the next question as well. What does the year look like? So Matt, I think you just nailed it. For the FY22 community project funding grants awarded, any idea when we can expect the funds allocated to Matt? So just answering that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different for each agency. I wouldn't say that 60 to 90 days is necessarily the same for all of them. You know, these agencies are administering the grants of the same name as Taylor mentioned, so they're getting money out the door for those competitive grant programs, but they're also, you know, they vary in size. Some, you know, we had, I think, 1,500 or more projects that we included for the Department of Transportation and the Department of, you know, Housing and Urban Development, but maybe we only had a few for the Department of Agriculture. So it's a little bit dependent on how many they have. But as Krista said, we have to sort of resurrect this process. There was an earmark process 11 years ago. It went away. And now these agencies are figuring out how they're going to get money to all the recipients, and they're sort of creating new structures and new mechanisms. So with any luck, next year it'll be a little bit easier, having done it once before, but this is the first time for them. So they're sort of squaring away all the details, and they're going to get the money to everyone as soon as they can. So rest assured, it's been signed into law. It's guaranteed for you, but it's going to come when it comes. Unfortunately, we have no exact answer.
Great. I am not seeing any more questions, and we are coming up on the end of the hour. So again, thank you for everyone's participation and for such thoughtful and really smart questions. We appreciate it. Again, we've gotten our emails and you know our phone numbers, so please follow up if you feel like you did not get your question asked. I believe we will also share this webinar or certainly can share our appropriations guide, which is also live on our website. If you don't still have that link, just Google Congressman Trone, go to his official website, and it's up in the services tab. So again, thank you all so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Look forward to working with you and reading your applications, and yeah, let's get some great community projects funded. Thanks, everyone.